The Baltimore Ravens were linked to Cooper Kupp by an experienced NFL voice. We talk about the realisticness of a potential trade. We'll also talk about Stephen A. Smith disrespecting Lamar Jackson and having an interesting take, and Dan Orlovsky being the one to defend him. We'll talk about that and so much more coming up next on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day, your first listen each and every single day as well. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. So in video form on YouTube, you can like and subscribe to the channel. In audio form, you can follow along and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. We're a 5-day-a-week plus more daily Ravens show, news, analysis, updates, the whole 9 yards, in season, off season. We have you covered with daily Ravens content. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Midweek edition of the show, Jake Louque of the Exit 52 podcast is back with us. And I always like talking to Jake because he is the one that loves my behind-the-scenes shenanigans when I first start off the recordings, the things that aren't seen on the actual show, which is I have to make sure my mic, which I'm going to get a new one soon, I don't want it to peak out. And if you talk about commit to the bit, Jake had his hand up waiting for a minute and a half waiting for me to start this off. And he did just that. Jake, I'm happy to have you back on.
Good to be here. I mean, before you get a new one, though, I feel like we have to release sort of the unreleased takes. We have to put one out there to the people to show them what, because every time I come on, we talk about this. And I feel like every time I come on, people hear us chop it up about this thing. And maybe they haven't seen your glorious rendition of you kind of doing your Ron Burgundy bit there, getting prepared to go on air. So I feel like you got to put that out there to the people.
Yeah, definitely some outro takes. And I think Rocco, when we Rocco DeSangro on as a weekly guest, he exposed me, and I know you took some joy in that, seeing that.
Rocco. I mean, Rocco's a TV guy. He's a true media professional. So I feel like he'd be all into that kind of scene too.
Yeah, Rocco, whenever he would do some of the same stuff, although we have to get a couple of those outro takes, but to get a blooper reel-esque type deal. But the offseason does not stop for anything. We've already heard a couple of players who are either asking their way off of their current teams, or their current teams are saying, we're done with you, we're going to trade you. The first one being Cooper Kupp. Myles Garrett was the whole trade situation, which we'll get into a little bit later. But Cooper Kupp released on social media on Monday night that the Rams essentially want to move forward without him. They're going to work with him to find a trade partner. And obviously that kicked up a whole bunch of speculation about a bunch of teams that could be involved for his services. Kupp is owed $20 million. The roster bonus situation is interesting, though. If the Rams do pay that, then that hit comes down to $12.5 million, which is a lot more manageable. Cooper Kupp on a $20 million salary doesn't feel reasonable for a lot of teams, Ravens included. But there was an interesting article that came out courtesy of NFL.com, and Mark Ross, who is worked in scouting, Eagles, Giants. He's a 2-time Super Bowl champion. He was an executive with the XFL. He knows his way around football, respected voice. He linked the Ravens and Cooper Kupp. And it's interesting. He said the Baltimore Ravens have a history of bringing in big name stars who are on the back end of their career. See Steve Smith and Deshaun Jackson. Kupp would join the Ravens offense as the third or fourth receiving option behind Zay Flowers and Rashod Bateman, which is ideal at Kupp's age. Lamar Jackson would greatly benefit from having a sure-handed Kupp in the middle of the field. Kupp's salary could make it hard for Baltimore to acquire him, but I love the on-field fit. Now, if I were Mark, I maybe would have put Anquan Bolden instead of Deshaun Jackson in terms of veteran wide receivers who the Ravens have brought in. But hey, you know what? The sentiment is still true. The Ravens have a history of that. Wide receiver is a need. That money makes it a little bit difficult. Obviously, injury history is a big conversation too. Jake, when you first saw the news, did you maybe jump at it and say, oh, that's a Ravens move that could happen? Or are you kind of like, might be another guy they go look at?
Yeah, I mean, how could you not, right? It just feels like every time a big name wide receiver comes available, and, a guy of this high profile doesn't come available very often. And so it's sort of, if you're a Ravens fan of a certain age, which is to say, I would think most Ravens fans at this point, it hasn't been that long that it feels like the Ravens have kind of figured out the wide receiver position with Zay and certainly Bateman having a good year like this. And, hitting on some diamonds in the rough, like a Tylan Wallace, who had a solid year, nothing special, but he's a solid rotational piece. Nelson Aguilar, solid rotational piece. Feels like they're okay at wide receiver right now. But, if you're a Ravens fan, like my age or your age or a little bit younger than us, even even if you're of that age, it feels like every single time a wide receiver comes available, you as a fan are coveting it. I don't know if that totally matches up with the reality right now. Like, I think the points that Mark Ross is making there, I think a lot of them make sense, but right up until he gets to that last point, I think he's kind of glossing over the salary aspect a little bit. I just feel like even if you were to get him down even a couple million to like a 9 or an 8 or whatever, however the math would work out, it still wouldn't feel like a great fit to me, given the fact that you're probably talking about a very high-end third or fourth receiver, that kind of deal. I guess my answer to it is like, yeah, of course I considered it like right when it first, your synapses first fire when you see that. Of course, as a Ravens fan, you're like, oh my God, like Cooper Kupp. Ravens wanted him in that 2017 draft. Rams got up in front of them and got him. Steve Smith was scouting them for him and saying, like, you got to go get this guy. Maybe even a couple of years ago, if he had been available, absolutely it would have been the move. But at this point, I just unless he were to be released and you could just negotiate with him outright and you could tell him straight up, like, hey, man, you're our third option. Sure. But for right now, I think for Cooper Kupp's part, this strikes me as weird that a player is coming out and releasing a statement ahead of the team saying, hey, they told me they're going to trade me. That to me kind of screams like he's just trying to negotiate with the Rams right now and trying to figure out a way to get his salary to a point where he needs it and his role to a point where he needs it, where he can finish out his career with the Rams paid as he wants to be and hopefully compete for one more title. But even if not, I feel like there are probably going to be better landing spots for him than Baltimore. So as much as I think it would be a good fit, just on the surface level on the field, there's kind of a lot of hurdles here with Cooper Kupp where it's just kind of not the right timing. I would say right player, wrong price, and right player, wrong time.
I would agree with you. And there are going to be a bunch of other teams. David Carr in the same article linked the Bills, Maurice Jones-Drew linked the Jaguars, which is interesting. So I don't think Mark is misplaced. And look, Mark has experience scouting, he has experience helping teams go and win Super Bowls. So I think that his voice does carry a little bit of weight. But at the end of the day, we don't know if the Ravens are going to want to commit whatever money it is. And we don't know if the Rams are going to pay whatever bonus that is. Again, it could come down from 20 million to 12.5 million. But if the Rams eat some of that money, that is going to mean they're going to want more of a return. And again, when you talk about like a Myles Garrett trade package, Cooper Kupp is going to come nowhere close to that. Like you could probably get Cooper for a mid-round pick, maybe even a late-round pick if the Rams eat a lot of that money, because clearly the Rams want to move off of him. And they said, okay, this is something we want to move forward with. And that does they lose a little bit of leverage doing that. But there are going to be other options that are intriguing. Maybe if you want to vet wide receiver, is Keenan Allen an option? Do you go and draft a high-profile guy in the first 2 rounds? That's an option as well. But with Zay and Rashod Bateman, I agree, Jake. A couple of years ago, we would have been jumping at this and being like, okay, like this is the guy. Like, and especially because Cooper, over the course of his career, he's played 8 years. He's only played in a full season twice. And again, when he's healthy, he's incredible. But going to be 32 by the time the season starts next year. I think as a high-end wide receiver 3, it'd be awesome. But then it also comes down to, does Cooper want that, or is he more so still looking for being a number 2 wide receiver, which at this point, I think Rashod Bateman has thoroughly earned in this offense. So it is Zay and Rashod right now. You throw in a sprinkle of Tez Walker because Deontay Johnson, obviously that worked out great, didn't it? No, obviously not. But then you have
on the roster right now, you never know.
I think there's only one thing that could be more shocking than the Ravens claiming Deontay back, and that would be the Ravens re-signing Deontay this offseason and just being like, oh, did they just hash out all their differences and like everything's okay now?
Yeah, dude. I mean, he's probably got as good of a chance catching on with the Ravens as anybody else, given how tumultuous this past season was for him. But, that's neither here nor there, I guess.
I think we are closer, honestly. And maybe it's a bit harsh. I don't feel like it's that harsh personally, but I think we're closer to his career being over than we are to him re-signing with the Ravens. And now the Ravens, they do have a situation because, maybe if it had worked in Baltimore, he would be a prime option to re-sign with the team and be a member of the organization moving forward. But there's a need there because it's Zay, Rashod, Tez Walker, Tylan Wallace is a free agent. Deontay Johnson is Deontay Johnson. And you also have, Nelson Aguilar, I don't expect to be back. I feel like they might want to upgrade that. So where's your confidence level in this wide receiver room right now? And what's your hope for it this offseason as they try to round this thing out?
Yeah, it's like a solid B. I think Zay has proven himself to be a very high-end wide receiver. I don't know if he's like your typical wide receiver one, as people want to say. I feel like that's a little bit of a term that's become more and more nebulous as it's become more and more of a passing league. And, guys can emerge as top threats in one way or another. So I think Zay is kind of solidified as your top guy right now. I think that feels very good. I think Bateman stepped up big time this season in a way that we were all hoping. And, really, I think he was hoping for with his career. I think the injury concerns, thankfully, didn't rear their ugly head. And he had, he had his down moments. Rashod did, but overall, I think he proved himself to be a nice second option there. And so outside of that, like Tez Walker, I liked him out of UNC. We didn't see a ton from him this past season, obviously, but there's promise there that you can bet on. And I don't know. I just think like DaCosta, like he hasn't completely revitalized this room. He hasn't shown that he's like an amazing finder of talent at this position, but he's shown that he's much more competent at it, and certainly much more competent at it than Ozzie was. I think he's just kind of a guy who has a feel for who to pick up on the veteran free agent market. He's certainly found a feel for some of these guys in the mid rounds. I think you mentioned Tylan Wallace being a free agent. He was just a solid kind of fourth round pickup there. There are some guys that he's missed on, Boykin and some of these other guys, but even those guys, they managed to find some production out of. Nonetheless, and it's just kind of we're at a position where you can find productive wide receivers in the third and fourth round a lot easier these days than you used to be able to, just because there's an abundance of them. So it's probably at like a B minus right now if I had to kind of be a little bit of a harsher grader. But overall, I feel like they can figure things out. I think Bateman really showing a lot helps with my confidence level of this, and I think Zay Flowers is really poised to continue to take another step and prove that he is kind of that high end sort of top wide receiver.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about it before. My sweet spot for wide receiver is 6, just in terms of roster spots for the position. And if we're going off of that logic, we're just saying, all right, it's going to be 6 wide receivers next year. You have 3 already accounted for with Bateman, Flowers, and Walker. I feel like they will try to re-sign Tylan. I feel like it's either going to be Aguilar or Tylan, and I want to bring one or two of those guys back. I'd probably say one. So maybe you have to choose between Nelson and Tylan. I think they probably sign a guy. I think the big question is just, is it going to be a higher end veteran, or is it going to be one of those Nelson Aguilar, Sammy Watkins signings? And then I think they definitely draft one. Early day 3 is probably where I'd say is the cutoff for that. I could see them taking a guy on day 2. I feel like there are definitely some wideouts that could fit Baltimore's roster right now, and just depends what route they want to take with it. But, if Mark Ross is right and the Ravens go out there and they go get a Cooper Kupp, I'm not opposed to it. I just think it's going to be interesting based off of how the money ends up working there. But coming up in the second part of the show, we get to talk about Jake's favorite thing, and that is national media Lamar Jackson takes. So we're going to dive into what Stephen A. Smith had to say. And Dan Orlovsky, who got in some hot water with Ravens fans late in the season, he defended Lamar. So we should have stayed tuned. We got a lot coming up on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by Gametime. Looking for tickets to your next big event, maybe last-minute tickets to the big game, whether it's a concert, comedy show, or a sports game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache, but with Gametime Picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Gametime Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. I've been using Gametime Picks for a while now, and here's why I love it. The curated deals make it super simple to find great tickets at a great price. No more sifting through thousands of options. I recently grabbed a super deal for a prime seat, and I couldn't believe the value. It was a steal. The seat view feature is a game changer. Before I even hit buy, I can see exactly what my seat will look like in the venue. It's so reassuring. And the best part, you're covered with Gametime's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. Ready to make your next event even better? Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Back on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher and Jake Louque still hanging out with you here on this Wednesday, just a couple days away from the Super Bowl. And now Jake and I get to indulge in his favorite pastime, talking about Stephen A. Smith and Dan Orlovsky firing off Lamar Jackson takes. I'll preface it with this, Jake. We'll talk about the take, then we'll react to it on our own accord. Stephen A. ended up saying that if Patrick Mahomes wins a Super Bowl, this third Super Bowl here, wins 3 straight, Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen's legacies take hits because there's going to be this one guy that you can't beat. He referenced Peyton Manning and Tom Brady and that whole situation. And Dan Orlovsky, who again rode for Josh Allen late in the season, Josh Allen MVP, all that, got some hot water with Ravens fans. He was like, wait, what are you talking about? That's going to be there regardless. Like if Lamar plays Mahomes in the playoffs, it's the conversation is going to be Lamar can't get past Mahomes or Allen can't get past Mahomes, regardless of if Mahomes wins or loses this. If anything, in my opinion, Jake, it improves Lamar's legacy a little bit if Mahomes wins this because it's one guy that you can't beat, but it's one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. And there is like, okay, you're not losing to Geno Smith every year. No shot at Geno Smith, by the way. He's a very solid quarterback nowadays. But I just think that there's no shame in losing to Patrick Mahomes. It's unfortunate because who knows what Lamar's legacy would be if Mahomes wasn't as good as he is or the Chiefs weren't as good as they are. But I just think it's interesting that Lamar just finds his way in these conversations all the time. And here we are talking about him again when the focus should be on Mahomes and how crazy good that Chiefs team has been over the last 7 seasons.
Yeah, I think I tend to come down on Dan's side of that a little bit, where it's just like, what does it really say about these other guys? I just think it says how great Mahomes is, that he's in conversation for this 3rd in a row and to get his 4th overall. And he's just kind of, in my opinion, he's the best quarterback I've ever seen play the position. He doesn't quite have the resume of Brady yet, but he's creeping up on it. And I don't know. I think he's better even than Brady at his peak, even at Rodgers at his peak, who I think you could argue was the best quarterback I had seen play, at Aaron Rodgers' overall peak and whatever it might have been, 2014, 2015. I think he's better than that by like a decent enough margin. Like this dude is insane, Mahomes. So like the fact that like it would take away from Lamar or Josh or Burrow, who's been kind of out of the conversation sneaky for the last couple of years as far as playoff goes. I don't know, man. I kind of tend to come down on Dan's side where it's like Mahomes is just that freaking good that it shows how good that he is, that he's able to fend off these guys and they're relatively well run, at least as far as the Bills and the Ravens go, organizations year after year, where you're in the AFC Championship against the Bills one year and it's the 13 seconds, and then it's the Ravens and you go into Baltimore and you get a big win there. I don't think Lamar did himself any favors or Zay in that game necessarily, but still a closely contested game that the Chiefs wound up hanging on in. And then obviously this year he goes out there and he just kind of quietly, just calmly gets it done and just sort of chokes the life out of that game in Kansas City a week ago. I don't know. I tend to come down on Dan's side, as I keep saying here. I just think that Mahomes is very squarely in his own tier here. I think you could swap out any of the other 3 horsemen here with Josh, with Joe, with Lamar, whatever your preference is. I certainly tend to be a Lamar homer there. But any of those 3 guys, I think, could have their claim for second place, and I think they're all kind of squarely in that second tier. And then beyond that, it's sort of whatever. And it makes you almost wonder, like, where would we be if one of these guys was in the NFC? I think Jalen Hurts is great, obviously, and I think Dak is very solid in his own right. He's not, I don't think his team is doing him any favors. I think Jerry Jones is kind of wasting his career. Jordan Love, we'll see. But it's just like, man, you look at the NFC versus like, if this is the second tier and they're all in the AFC, these 3 guys, Lamar and Josh, who just had historic years, Joe had a historic year too, not on a good team, obviously. But if they were on the other side of the bracket here, makes you wonder if they could get to that one game and just like outduel the Chiefs once or twice. Could these guys have like 1 or 2 more rings than they might wind up with in their entire career? It's kind of a depressing thought if you're a Ravens fan or Bills or Bengals, but it's just like, it's kind of where my head starts to go here.
It's interesting because Cam Newton talked about that. I think last week he talked about that. And, I talked with Sam and Njoku about it for our Friday show. And he was like, if the Ravens were in the NFC, they'd be in the Super Bowl every year because it's just like, it's how it goes. Like, with guys like Jalen Hurts, you mentioned others as well in that NFC conference, there's just such a talent gap between the AFC top 4 and the NFC top 4, especially when you start getting to like 3-4. You don't even know who to put there at points. Like, you're just like, okay, is it like Goff? Is it Stafford? Is it?
I think the best, like, no disrespect to Jalen Hurts, who's great, but I think the best quarterback in the NFC, like, already might be Jaden Daniels, which is crazy.
Yeah, and I think that kind of speaks not only to how good Jaden is, but how weak the conference is in the NFC in terms of quarterbacks. And with the way, because again, the Ravens went through this with Brady back when Flacco was the quarterback. And look, Baltimore was able to fend them off one year, right? But it wasn't very often that they were able to in the postseason. Baltimore got one Super Bowl out of it, but that was the year they had to go through the gauntlet of rookie Andrew Luck, Peyton Manning and that Denver team in Mile High, and then Brady and Foxborough. And when they beat Brady and Foxborough, that was just like a big sigh of relief for everybody in Baltimore, because that's the one thing that they couldn't get over. That's the one guy they couldn't beat to get to that moment. And then they did. And then they were boat racing San Francisco until someone turned the lights out. And then obviously that game became a lot closer than it was. So is this just the same timeline a decade later where it's going to be that way? And then hopefully the Ravens will get there one of these years,
dude.
Whether it's a down year or something for Chiefs, I don't know. But I mentioned to Jake, where are you on Lamar Jackson right now in terms of his legacy? He could be a 3-time MVP by the time this week is over. Obviously, he has broken, we can't even count him on 8 hands probably, how many records he's broken, both Ravens team and NFL records. Obviously, the big thing that's missing is the Super Bowl appearance and the Super Bowl championship. But this is a guy that has redefined the position. He's had a historic impact on the game, and he's not even 30 years old yet. Still a long way to go. And I know a lot of people were talking about, well, if he wins this MVP and he wins the Super Bowl this year, he'll be cemented in, is it top 10 conversations, top 5 conversations with that championship. But without it, where do you think he is right now? And what do you kind of think his legacy is currently?
If he were to not make a Super Bowl, but then have kind of like a couple more on par seasons as to what we're used to him for, let's call it 3 or 4 more, Hall of Famer to me easily. I mean, 2 MVPs with all that he's done, all the records you mentioned that we don't even have to go through because there's so many of them. And then, yeah, like I said, a couple more seasons like that, I think he's easily going into Canton. He might, like you said, after Thursday night, he might have another MVP, on the mantle there. So that could certainly help him a ton. A Super Bowl would make it a cinch. It would make it no question. And that would put him in, I think, easily like top 5, top 7 all-time conversation. I think he might already be on his way there. I think the fact that he's playing amongst contemporaries that are sort of already on their way there too. I think with Mahomes and with Allen and Burrow, I think all these guys are. It's kind of like a Brady Manning thing, but there's 4 of them now. And of course, like we hit on, they're all in the same conference. I think, it's tough to say that. I don't know. It's tough to say top 10 or top 5 all time. Like I said, given that he's playing amongst these contemporary players that are all kind of on par as well and doing their own thing in their own great way. But I don't know, man. I just don't know what more you really need to see, save from a Super Bowl win. And it would have to be a Super Bowl win. We can sit here and say, oh, well, because like we said with he's never made a conference championship game. All right. Well, he did that. Does that really change your opinion of him that much, especially with the way that he, that all turned out? Probably not. If you were to get to a Super Bowl and lose, would it really change your opinion that much? No, probably not. Like, you'd have to go there and win one. It's the same thing. Like, Jalen Hurts, he's probably not going to be considered elite because he's appeared in 2 Super Bowls now. I think if he wins one this coming weekend, I think that would probably help him a little bit, but are you really going to think of him all that differently? I'm not so sure. So I don't know. I mean, as far as Lamar's legacy goes, I think it's pretty damn secure at this point. We're not even 10 years in, and he's improved himself to be an all-time great. As far as how much of an all-time great, I think there's certainly more to be said, but I guess we're just gonna have to wait and see another season here. And I think, like I said, if on Thursday night he walks away with an MVP trophy, I mean, that honestly, that might sew it up right there. That might put him in Canton. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
No, I think it does. And I think that to me is where it's so fun to have these conversations, because not every person gets in their lifetime a player that Lamar Jackson is on their team, which I think why, if you follow the NBA and the Luka Doncic trade that happened on Saturday, it's just that never happens, and teams don't get that guy in people's.
By the way, what the hell was Shefty thinking with that comparison? Lamar Jackson for Joe Burrow? No way.
And then I saw other ones where it was the Bengals get the pick in the trade, it's Lamar and a pick for Burrow, and I was like, okay, let's pump the brakes on that for a sec, because again, it was. For those who don't know the traders, Luka Doncic, for instance, Anthony Davis, those guys don't play the same position. Davis is older.
It'd be like Luka for Jason Tatum.
Yeah. Something like that. But I kind of said it was Lamar for Travis Kelce in picks, because it's different position.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
So something along those lines. But I have no idea. That was so out of left field too, because people were saying Rodgers and Stafford.
And then, by the way, shout out to X, the Everything app, which the AI tool on that thing is just completely out of control, because it's I see this the AI thing that's summarizing the news on the right side is saying Lamar Jackson for Joe Burrow trade discussions, this stupid description thing. I'm like, what are we doing here?
The way that Shefty worded it, this is, an NFL equivalent, Lamar Jackson traded. And I'm like, whoa, hold on. Like, calm, what's going on here? My heart dropped.
Yeah.
So that whole conversation is a whole different rabbit hole, but Adam Schefter was cooked for that take, as I think a lot of people probably thought he.
That's just like Shefty has tried to like break NBA news. He kind of like tried to get in there, and I think Woj sort of backed him off of that corner when Woj was still active, and now he's trying to like do his NFL is king thing that he does every year, and like slip NFL comparisons in there. Sometimes we don't need an NFL comparison, Shefty. Just get ready for the Super Bowl, let it happen, and then move on to the combine. Go to Indianapolis and St. Elmo's Fire and eat your steaks and talk to the agents and the GMs there and have your fun. Just spit this one out.
Absolutely wild situation. Another wild situation could be a Myles Garrett trade, which would fetch an absolute haul for the Cleveland Browns. So coming up, we'll talk about what Lamar Jackson said about that whole thing, or at least what he retweeted about the situation, as well as Chuck Pagano getting in on that action too, and some rumors heating up. Stay tuned. We got plenty to get to on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by PrizePicks. The big game is almost here, and there's no better way to make it even more exciting than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get in on the action. Here's how it works. You pick more or less on at least two players' projections, and if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game when Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw for 1 yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick, and you're cashing out. This week, I'm looking at the board and selecting more for Travis Kelce on receiving yards and more for Patrick Mahomes on passing yardage. What I love most, fast and safe withdrawals. When I win, my cash is in my account in as little as 15 minutes. Check out the promos tab to tail any of the super sweet Millie Winners big game lineups. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDON NFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDON NFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Kevin Oestreicher, Jake Louque here with you on Locked On Ravens Wednesday edition. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. Hit that like and subscribe button in video form and in audio form for 5 days a week of daily Ravens coverage. Jake, I'd be lying to you if you said I was completely shocked Myles Garrett requested the trade from Cleveland. I thought it was coming. I honestly thought it could have happened last season, but he gave it another year. Not a contract thing. This is legitimately he just wants to win. I know when Lamar requested his trade, and that was about the contract. And obviously that would solve the whole situation. I don't think that's going to work here with Myles Garrett. Lamar Jackson retweeted a post saying that he'd look good in purple and black. Chuck Pagano quote tweeted a guy saying Lions on a Pat McAfee clip of it with a Raven emoji. Obviously the Ravens would love Myles Garrett. The Ravens need a game-breaking edge. Myles Garrett is that player. I would give up the farm. It's a matter of the in-division thing is really what gets me here. I just think there's a different price for the Ravens, Bengals, and Steelers. If you're going to trade him out of the conference like Eagles, Commanders, whatever that may be, they could probably get him for less. I'd be floored if the Browns traded him to the Ravens or any team in that AFC North.
Yes, Cleveland's front office and ownership would have to be a special kind of sadistic towards their own fans to do that to them. To trade him within the division to the Ravens, which is the team that a lot of Browns fans hate the most because they were quote unquote stolen from Cleveland 30 years ago at this point. And, the 2 Super Bowls that, quote unquote should, belong in Cleveland, whatever fantasies they want to tell themselves about that. But no, I mean, that can't happen. I saw my co-host Spenny was tweeting that the Ravens should, like you said, throw the farm, try to become the highest bidder. You could have teams like Washington or the Lions or whoever, might throw their hats in the ring. You just have to outbid them, like no matter what it takes, multiple first-round picks, maybe a good player in the mix there, and just go get the guy. Like if I felt like in any sort of reality that could happen, I would totally agree. I just don't think that if you're Jimmy Haslam, if you're Andrew Berry, like I just don't see how you could do this to your fans. You could say, hey, you know what? We're not only going to have a Joe Thomas 2.0 situation here or I guess not even a Joe Thomas, like this guy's at least going to have a chance to get out and try to go win a ring. But it's like, we're going to let him get away after all this tumult and all this kind of crap has gone on with Deshaun Watson the last couple of years. That was a total failure of a situation. And we've completely covered ourselves in shame. Now we're going to get rid of this guy and we're going to send him to the most hated rival, the just new and improved version of this team that you root for that we've never been able to emulate. I just could never in a one single reality out of the entire infinite multiverse ever see that happening.
Yeah, I don't either. And this could be one of those rare situations where if he was available and if Cleveland is in that mode of like, we're just going to do it and we're going to get the package that we want and the Ravens can offer that, the Ravens don't usually operate of like, if this is a multi-first round pick thing or multiple young players, they usually don't do that. Obviously, Jake, our favorite thing is the best second round pick in Ravens history is Roquan Smith. And even that was a stretch in terms of the.
Well, I was thinking of you when this got out there. I was like, do you know how hard it would hit when, they put the "we got our guy" tweet out there, how hard that would slap on that first night of the draft there when they traded one of, 3 first round picks to go get Myles Garrett. I'd be so into that.
And then if it's 3, we get it on like 3 straight years. Like,
oh yeah.
That is cinema right there.
Yeah. Got our guy.
And again, Myles Garrett is worth whatever price it is because he's that good of a player. He fits a need for the Ravens. And I think Anafe always took a step this season. Kyle Van Noy has been really, really good for the Ravens. Tavius Robinson, he's a heck of a run defender. I think he's going to have a great year next year. There is going to be that, okay, is there a game wrecker at that position? Now, if it's not Myles Garrett, could that be Khalil Mack? Could that be someone else? I don't know. I'm not saying it's impossible for the Ravens to get Myles Garrett. But again, I would be absolutely shocked if the Browns made that decision. But we have seen crazier things happen.
Is it right church, wrong pew? Could it be Micah Parsons, right? Could you package that kind of pick and move over to get a guy like that? It doesn't seem like the Cowboys are trying to do a whole lot this year. So I don't know. Could it be Micah?
Yeah, it could. That'd be interesting. And I would love Micah in Baltimore. Either one of those guys. Khalil Mack, I think, could be a nice consolation. And I say consolation for Khalil Mack, who's still a very good player, by the way. But I just think with that position, certainly a need. What other needs do you have for this team, Jake? I know everybody points to maybe offensive line, wide receiver, maybe in that secondary as well. Where are you kind of focusing on as the Ravens? Free agency is in almost a month now. It's creeping up decently fast.
Yeah, offensive line, big time. You don't really have a left tackle under contract right now, do you? You got to worry about that. You've got the interior of the line. I think Falele played admirably. Pro Bowler Daniel Falele. Crazy as that is to say, you're kind of rotating Voorhees and McCary there at left guard, and Josh Jones, I think, was a really nice swing tackle. So some good pieces there, but it just feels like that's why I wasn't so high on this past year's team coming into the season. I felt like that would be a bigger issue than it was. But even though they went on to go and win 12 games and win a playoff game, I feel like it wasn't even talked about how much they did kind of have to paper over the lack of talent on the offensive line. I think it was a tremendous coaching job by George Warhop coming in on short notice and coaching those guys up. I think Harbaugh deserves credit for it. Monken, I think it's a big testament to Lamar's ability to take pressure off of guys. It feels like wide receivers looking okay right now. Maybe like we were talking about earlier, you get a veteran or two and draft a guy or two and just kind of figure it out at that position. You feel good about your tight ends. Defense feels okay. I feel like offensive line is the one that I'd be focused on right now, number one with a bullet. So
yeah. I agree. And that's something Eric DeCosta mentioned at the end of season press conference. And clearly, whether Roger Rosengarten is on the left or right side next year, that is still up for debate. I think that Ronnie Stanley, he had a much better year than I think some people thought he was going to have. He stayed healthy. And while I don't think it was his best season, I still think that he was very serviceable at that position. And teams need serviceable offensive linemen. That offensive line market, free agency wise, is out of control. Robert Hunt got $100 million from Carolina. Damian Lewis got 66 or something, 63 from Carolina as well. Ronnie's going to get a payday. And look, you can't keep everybody. That's been a theme where the Ravens draft, they develop, they extend, and sometimes it just doesn't work out. If they can find that guy, whether it is a guard, I know people love Tyler Booker out of Alabama. Maybe that's somebody they bring in as a guard and you put him on the interior and you can move guys around. Because again, if McCary doesn't come back, you do have an option there. And I don't even think, I would prefer McCary as a backup anyway, but there are so many different options for this team this offseason. I'm really excited to see how it plays out because there are multiple directions they could take. And I think there is success for multiple different avenues that they could decide to have go on this offseason. But Jake, I appreciate your time. Thank you for hopping on. As always, tell people where they can find you and what you're working on. I know you're very busy over there at Exit 52, especially with baseball season almost around the corner here.
Yeah, definitely. Exit 52 podcast on YouTube, anywhere you find your podcast, that kind of stuff. Hopefully we're releasing an episode tomorrow talking Ravens specifically. There's a lot that we have to catch up on. We haven't been able to get in the recording studio. Actually, I haven't for a couple of weeks. Actually, I wasn't able to react live to the playoff loss to the chagrin of many of our listeners. I was down in Mexico for a work trip. So I was watching that in a little hotel room in San Luis Potosi, Mexico. I had to go right to sleep, had a 4 a.m. wake up call. So that was just a knife to the gut there. So yeah, maybe give some, very belated reaction to that, talk some of the unfortunate goings on with the kicker of this football team, talk about, other things that are worthy of addressing, like Chuck Pagano, like everything else that's been going on. So a lot to catch up on there. And that'll be on Exit 52 Podcast YouTube channel, wherever you get your shows. And if you're an Orioles fan as well, like you said, plenty heating up in that regard. We might actually have a guest on, I think, later this week, who may be a young pitcher for the ball club there. So if you're into the Orioles and you like left-handed pitchers who had some pretty decent moments last season, check that out. I'm not going to reveal who it is, but just tune in for that. And plenty of Ravens, plenty of Orioles, X52 podcast on YouTube, wherever you get your pods.
Yeah, so take those hints however you will. Try to fit those pieces together, and be sure to head over to Exit 52 to like, subscribe over there. The links all in the description down below. Jake, appreciate you as always, and thank you to everybody who tuned into Locked On Ravens today. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button in video form, and follow along and subscribe in audio form on the way out. Coming up tomorrow, more Ravens coverage for you, so be sure to stay tuned for that. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.